Stop scrolling. If you're a part of academia in any way, this post is for you. Educational and ethical reasons, Joanna Hollingsworth said they are no longer using the term imposter syndrome because last night they were taught by Dr. Tasheen, informed them the concept was developed by two white women who explained why minoritized folks feel like they are outsiders or face self-doubt. But it gets more critical, right? Hollingsworth continued by saying, in reality, the root of this fraud feeling is a result of systemic bias and exclusion. And rather than naming that, society, aka the academy, found another term to cover it up and name the experiences of marginalized community that places blame on the person rather than the system that created the condition in the first place. And Heather Harrison tapped in with more illustration of this old shenanigans, what I'm gonna call pathology in this point. She said, I didn't know that, but realized most of my imposter syndrome was based on how I'd been gassing others in my head, making more of them and their accomplishments. Now, shifting that energy to hype myself, remembering that I do belong and taking up space unapologetically. Yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. In conclusion, just like I seen in the old TikTok video, whose imagination are we living in, especially in the academy? See, a lot of us claim to be real critical and trying to progress and move forward, but a lot of the terms that we use are steeped in pathology, especially how it talks about people of color in those spaces. Education is elevation. I appreciate y'all.
This TikToker by the name of The Consciously points out something that is absolutely critical to understand. And that is the fact that what very often are systemic modes of oppression are often pathologized in the individual. Now, in order to fully understand this, we need to understand something that's really, really important, especially when it comes to marginalization and privilege. You see, there's something called imaginative labor, which is to say that in our society today, whenever a marginalized person is engaging with somebody who's more privileged than them, very often, the marginalized person is expected to anticipate the needs, whatever they may be, of the more privileged person around them. Now, very often, this means sort of like intellectual, social, and emotional needs. And so to take an example within the context of racism, very often Black folks are expected to not criticize white folks for being racist, not to point out their racism, or if they do, to be apologetic about it and to reassure white folks around them that, oh no, you're definitely not racist, you just didn't know. What is happening in that situation is that the Black person in that situation is being forced to imagine the emotional needs or potential emotional needs of the white folks around them, but the white folks are not being asked to imagine the emotional and social needs of the Black person around them. In that instance, one person is doing imaginative labor, which is the Black person trying to imagine what the emotional and social needs might be of the white person and helping them create whatever fantasies or illusions they may have about themselves. Because, like, that's the thing. If you're doing or saying something racist, people don't really owe you apologetics about your racism. People are totally fine to just say, hey, that's racist. They don't need to be particularly soft about it. But our society puts that expectation on people. And if you're thinking to yourself that you just can't relate to that situation or you can't imagine that happening, let's take another example. Another example within the context of the workplace would be something like if you're in a meeting with your boss and your boss says something declarative, like, this is true. You can't really contradict them, or if you do, you have to make excuses for them to say why they're wrong. Otherwise, you'll be punished for challenging their authority or questioning them in one way, shape, or another. Basically, you are being forced to maintain their illusions. This is something that exists on a systemic level, and it leads to this reality where whenever there's something that is a systemic problem, whenever there's something that is, for example, Black people being made uncomfortable by their white coworkers, and that being an issue of systemic racism in the United States, very often you'll have people try to pathologize that as things like imposter syndrome. They will individualize these systemic problems. They will use language to focus all of their attention on the one person who is being marginalized as opposed to looking at the structure as a whole and challenging the existing structures. And then on top of that, you have a whole nother layer where once something is pathologized, it starts to creep outside of its original distinction. So, for example, imposter syndrome being used to pathologize the existence of Black folks in workspaces for example, imposter syndrome originally being used to pathologize the existence of people of color within oppressively white spaces gets turned into this general pathology where a lot of white folks will run around today talking about having imposter syndrome. So that then, all of a sudden, what is the experience of specific marginalized groups of people all of a sudden becomes something that just happens to everybody, and that's part of normal society. So that the core structural problem, that is to say, the reality that a lot of white folks don't bother to think about how their actions are impacting their black peers. It just turns into a general conversation about imposter syndrome in general. And that's exactly the point. There's a litany of examples of these, but understanding this core concept is absolutely critical. Understanding the role that imaginative labor plays in society is absolutely critical, because it's one of the reasons why so many people have blind spots to particular issues. It's at the root of the issue of why so many white folks, for example, ask people of color really weird racist questions. It's one of the reasons why cisgender folks will ask trans people really weird transphobic questions, and why abled people ask weird, uncomfortable questions to people with disabilities. People who are privileged are not only not encouraged to imagine the life experience of other people around them, but in some ways they're actively disincentivized for it, where if people engage in thought process of thinking about what might somebody in this community think about my behavior right now, you might even get a lot of privileged folks around you saying, oh, look at this, we've got the PC police, which leads to these systems replicating themselves. There's an active aversion to even the most basic understanding of other people's life experiences. And so if you're a good person and you just realize that and you're like, oh my goodness gracious, how do I utilize this in my real life? How do I use this information? The best benchmark to sort of measure whether or not you're using this information appropriately is to understand whether or not you are successfully anticipating the needs of marginalized people around you. Because this shouldn't just be a reflective process for your past behavior. It should be an active process of thinking about the people that are around you and trying to anticipate their needs, especially when it comes to social needs, and understanding your impact on other people around you, and specifically through the lens of various forms of marginalization and oppression. And a lot of this might sound like a lot of work, but think about this for a second. Black folks in the United States are constantly expected to think about the thoughts of white folks around them. Trans folks in the United States are forced to constantly think about the thoughts of cisgender folks around us. Trying to think about and consider the thoughts and needs of other people around you is just a basic component of being a decent person. And anticipating other people's needs when you're in a space with them is kind of just entry level being a decent person, which is why understanding this reality is so important. The imbalance of understanding that exists and the fact that marginalized people are forced to engage in this type of imaginative labor, where privileged people quite literally have the privilege of ignorance to other people's experience, perpetuates existing social hierarchies that maintains inequalities to this very day, and attempts to pathologize the experiences of marginalized people plays a central role in erasing this reality from privileged folks' view. This has been Carollo with Rebel Headquarters. You can catch my show Galaxy Brain every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the Young Turks Twitch channel, and you can follow me at Benjamin Carollo on Twitter.